deep surgical scars, and it felt like every part of him had some complaint, some ache. He had to remind himself that this was still progress. He could take care of himself now, more or less. Above all, he was alive, still living, still keeping on. Wasn't that some song lyric? He wondered as he turned off the water and began drying himself. Sure. Keep on keeping on. Something from way back when. He dressed, made himself some coffee, and swallowed the first dose of muscle relaxers and anti-inflammatory medications that he would take twice more on a regimented schedule throughout the day. Sometimes they helped, sometimes not so much. Then he looked at the clock on the wall in his kitchen and saw that it was 8 a.m. 8 a.m.? What now? He poured himself a second cup of coffee he didn't necessarily want and took it outside, easing himself into a rusty beach chair in his backyard. The grass here was patchy and brown, the yard itself sloping down toward a damaged bulkhead and the remnants of a dock barely standing just above the waterline of a shallow canal. On the other side of the canal was a line of small houses that were only partly visible through a wall of waving cattails. The houses were all deserted. Some had broken windows and caved-in doors. Most were shedding their vinyl siding like molting skin. Others looked waterlogged and were streaked with black mold, victims all of the ravages of Hurricane Sandy, which had torn through this southern edge of Long Island just 2 years ago. Paul's house, a rental he was glad to have, was one of the few on his side of the canal that had managed to survive the storm unscathed. The real estate agent who had shown him the house had espoused a theory about why that was, which seemed to hinge equally on a minor knowledge of physics and meteorology, with a hefty dose of conjecture thrown in. Paul could vaguely recall it now, summoning up a jumble of facts, including how the storm had whipped up the waves in the nearby ocean, driving them inland to form a bottleneck at the mouth of the canal. The pressure of the water rushing inland had then caused flooding at the eastern end of the canal that had overwhelmed the houses on their banks, except for a few that had benefited from the fact that hurricane winds blow west, and those winds had met the flood tide from the east, driving it back in some places. One of those places, apparently, had been behind Paul's house. The yard had drowned, but the house, no more than a bungalow really, had stayed high and dry. The grass might not grow back for years, poisoned as it was by salt and God knows what else carried along by the flood. But at least the hurricane-related damage had made the monthly rent for the house more than reasonable. Still, it was an odd place to be living, but beggars, as Paul reminded himself, especially those sent begging after a catastrophic illness, could not be choosers. A social worker at the rehab had helped him find the real estate agent who had been instrumental in landing him here, after it became clear that he was not going to be able to continue to pay the rent in the university town on Long Island's North Shore where he had been living. She had told him there was a house he could afford in a development called Skyview, but at first, hearing this, Paul had laughed. Suggesting that he go to live in Skyview was akin to saying he should consider taking up residence in a theme park stuck somewhere back in the 1950s. Paul had grown up not far away, and when he was a boy, his father had kept a Skyview sales brochure in a kitchen drawer, as if it was a dream of leisure living he might someday achieve if he worked hard and long enough. The sales pitch was that the houses, arranged side by side on streets named after planets, astronauts, and all things related to space and rocketry, were built on a spit of land situated so that on a clear night the residents could see the sky light up when there were launches from Cape Canaveral, more than 1,000 miles away in Florida. Well, maybe that was true, and maybe it wasn't, but at least they could tie up a boat. A boat! Paul's father was barely able to afford a car, let alone anything larger than a rowboat, to the docks lining the canal that snaked